This is Football at 4.
Football at 4 powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. Andrew DiCecco's here. It's brought to you by Bet365. Whatever the sport, whatever the moment, it's never ordinary at Bet365. Football at 4 on a Thursday with Andrew here on the Sports Bass Live. 97.3 ESPN, the 97.3 ESPN free mobile app. Well, there's been plenty of drama surrounding the Philadelphia Eagles over the last 48 hours or so, Andrew. They have an offseason ahead. The draft is on the way. But it seems that people, Andrew, one of the things about a season that goes bad, people say eventually, things will start to come out. Are you buying any of the stuff you're hearing? You were in that locker room. Are you starting to hear some things and saying, you know what, some of this stuff now makes more sense? How are you reading the stuff that's going on with Jalen Hurts and Big Dom and Nick Sirianni? I mean, this last 48 hours has turned bizarre.
Yeah, it has, but a lot of the stuff that has come out, the stuff that has merit, is things that either I've gathered over the season, or you've heard Jeff or Adam, or you've seen it written in other places. Like, there hasn't been this enlightening moment where you say, oh yeah, that also happened, and now we're just uncovering that. I mean, it doesn't take a genius to tell you that obviously Jalen Hurts was being bogged down with a lot of his off the field responsibilities. He's a creature of habit, and being out of his element and having to cater to so many different things ultimately detracts you, and it can impact you on the field. And then obviously the Sean Desai thing and the switching of the defensive coordinators, and obviously there was a trickle down from there, and we all know that story. But other than that, I don't like to give any credence to any speculation or innuendo. I mean, frankly, I can't wait for the combine or the free agency because all this discourse is really ridiculous in my opinion.
Yeah, and you mentioned the Hurts stuff. I mean, that comes out that, hey, he really kind of had him going in a lot of different directions. He wasn't really prepared for it. And then the first thing people say is, well, then you shouldn't have signed that contract. How do you kind of look at moving forward for him? Do you have concern that his personality doesn't fit the contract he signed?
No, because I think like anything, it takes an adjustment period, right? And yeah, this season was probably a rude awakening and a sign of things to come for Jalen, and he's never really experienced that, right? He's always been the underdog. But now that you've been in the spotlight, you're doing Hulu commercials and things like that, and you're not accustomed to doing that. I think now you sort of rip the Band-Aid off, and you kind of know what to expect going into it moving forward, and knowing that you're going to have a lot more eyes on you. You're going to have to meet a lot more different demands, and you're going to have people pulling you in different directions. So I think now, after you're accustomed to it, you sort of you sort of are able to turn the page, and it becomes something ordinary, like what happens to Tom Brady or Peyton Manning. I mean, I'm sure when those guys were in those situations, initially it was a shock to them as well. But like anything, you settle in and you kind of get used to it.
Yeah, I know that a lot of people looking at Hurts, like kind of not knowing what to think about him moving forward and what kind of season he had or what the reason why the season didn't look like the one the year before. But obviously, the new coordinator, we'll see what happens there. What was your reaction hearing the Big Dom stuff? Once he got – I mean, this thing is bonkers to me. He gets suspended, and then Sirianni a lot of people texted in today, like, you got to get rid of Sirianni. He's childish. When you hear that, does it bring you some pause as to how they brought him back?
I certainly think there's the Dom factor, and he does play a big role in sort of harnessing Nick Sirianni and being that mediator on the sideline that you need, especially when you have a passionate coach like that is prone to emotional outbursts. But I think that it was sort of I think a lot of folks took that and they sort of took it and ran with it and saying he needs a babysitter, for lack of a better term. And I don't know that's what it was intended to mean, right? I think Big Dom actually serves a role, but to think that he was a reason, a primary reason why the collapse happened, I mean, that's ridiculous. I think a lot of folks are looking for an answer and they're trying to pinpoint different things. It was an amalgam of things that really contributed to the Eagles spiraling out of control. It's not just one person, one player, one situation. And I mean, it happened, and we have to move forward. If you're the Eagles, you have a team to build to look forward in 2024, and you have to put that in the rearview mirror. And I think ultimately players who don't come back, and you can sort of read between the lines on some of the things that happen. And I think you're going to whatever was a factor probably won't be around or won't be a contributing factor next season. So you can look at it in terms of personnel. You looked at it in the coaching staff, right? I mean, a fresh-faced coaching staff, offensively and defensively primarily. So I think all these things moving forward are what you need to focus on, and not really. You have to leave 2023 in the rearview mirror and stop trying to find look up under every rock for an answer.
Yeah, I guess one thing when it comes to Nick, and I have to imagine, Andrew, that Laurie and Roseman went to the veteran players on this team and that Nick got overwhelming support. Otherwise, he wouldn't be here. Like if they said Big Dom wasn't here and this guy was a clown and he doesn't know how to act, and you go to Jason Kelsey, Fletcher Cox, Brandon Graham, Jalen Hurts, A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, Dallas Goedert, hey, guys, what do you think? You would think they would say, look, we can't play for this guy, and he'd be gone. I would have to imagine he got the support of his players.
Absolutely, and actions speak louder than words, and Nick Sirianni is viewed differently internally than he may be to the outside world. To the perception is different. What may look like an impassioned coach who kind of acts out irrationally and things of that nature, yeah, that happens. We all see that. But what you're not seeing, what we're all not privy to, is what Nick Sirianni does behind closed doors in connecting and building team camaraderie, sort of trying to find ways to relate to different players and his week-to-week preparation. We don't see any of that. Those guys do. And when you have a overwhelming support coming from different veterans and young players alike, well, there's something to be said for that. And it certainly doesn't seem to be a popular decision from the outside with retaining Nick Sirianni, but the fact of the matter is he has the support of that locker room, which should further drive home the point that he did not lose the team.
Andrew DiCecco, Football at 4 here on the Sports Bash Live, 97.3 ESPN. Yeah, because, the Jalen Hurts stuff, it's like, okay, you had the first semester of college and you were like, whoa, this is my first chance on my own. And, when I come back from Thanksgiving break, I really got to buckle down here. You would think the benefit of the doubt is there for him to now know what his schedule is going to be. So you feel that if he had problems adjusting, should get past that, right?
Yeah, 100%. Everything happened really fast. Right, you get to the Super Bowl in 2022, then you have all these endorsements, and you have a lot more interviews and everything. You're getting pulled in a million directions. Now you know how to balance that schedule. You have folks who are around you who are more apt to make sure that they're being a good liaison and finding ways to shield you from some of the overwhelming aspects that come with being a preeminent player in the NFL. So also, Jalen will know how to sort of balance it himself. He knows where he maybe felt overwhelmed and how to sort of mediate that, I guess, for lack of a better term. And also, you have to factor in the on-field stuff, right? The on-field play. He regressed from a mechanical standpoint in many aspects. I think getting a veteran offensive coordinator in there and a veteran quarterback coach in Doug Nussmeier, who has a long-standing history of developing talent at the quarterback position, is ultimately going to help him as well and alleviate some of the pressure that Jalen was feeling on the field, feeling as though he had to make every play out there. So I think all the things so far that have happened around the Eagles have been positive in trending towards the right direction and trying to turn the page from a dismal 2023 season.
To do that, they got to beef up the roster. Let's look at a couple things you wrote about over at InsideTheBirds.com. I want to get into Swift because the betting odds for running backs is interesting around the Eagles. I mean, they're the favorite to sign Tony Pollard if he doesn't return to the Cowboys. They were high on the list for some of the other key running backs, Derrick Henry, Saquon Barkley. There was one other one that they were pretty high on the list for that's escaping me. But do you think that they would be a player in Austin Eckler was the other one. Do you think they will be a player in free agency, or does that not sound like the road that Howie Roseman would travel?
I have a hard time thinking that this regime is going to pay an exorbitant fee for an outside running back. The Eagles aren't averse to paying running backs, but if you look at their history, it's more along the lines of homegrown talent, along the lines of a LaShawn McCoy, a Brian Westbrook. So I think that you're going to probably see a middling player. Maybe a Zach Moss would be a nice addition, and then draft a running back, and then you have Kenny Gainwell. And I would imagine Boston Scott would return as well, because you don't want to completely tear apart the cupboard and have a bunch of unfamiliar entities back there behind Kenny Gainwell. So I think having that familiarity and Boston Scott's not going to break the bank there. I would think you're going to see a moderate mid-tier free agent signing, more of the bigger bodied dynamic, and then draft a player. Draft one that you can sort of grow, and maybe they become one of those homegrown talents that you want to be a piece to the future. But I don't think that they're going to be forking over so much money to bring in a Derrick Henry and Austin Eckler when they have so many other needs on the roster to fill that take priority.
You like any of those guys at all as a fit? I mean, Eckler obviously was in San Diego, L.A. with more, Pollard with more. Henry is you get to an age where you start to question it, but he's certainly a productive back still. Saquon, injury issues. Do any of them, would you think are a good fit here?
Well, Derrick Henry would be a good fit for any team. And I think if you're looking at the Eagles and what they're missing a power element to their running game in the backfield. Too many times they've been overly reliant on using Jalen Hurts to pick up those short yardage plays. And I think that that's where a bigger-bodied running back like a Derrick Henry could be able to fulfill a significant role. That said, he's not going to come at a cost-effective rate here. So that right there, knowing how the Eagles do business, that would completely take them off my slate. Now, crazier things have happened. You look at DeMarco Murray, but again, that was Chip Kelly in a different era. So that's why it's hard for me to fathom them doing that. I also think Austin Eckler would be a fantastic fit here, being the pass-catching running back, a dual threat. But he's also struggled with staying healthy as of late, and he's more of a complementary running back. He's not a feature running back, and you already had someone of that caliber in DeAndre Swift, obviously to a lesser degree, but somebody who is not necessarily equipped to be a three-down running back. And he's a little bit older. I think he's 29 years old. So Derrick Henry of the bunch would be the player that I would think would be a fit, just given his skill set. But outside, I just don't think that the Eagles would be willing to pony up for someone to a running back position.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. I don't know. The only way I really see, Andrew, is if, say, Pollard or Eckler, one of those type of guys, just is sitting out there and they're willing to take the 1-year prove-it deal and they get him at a number they feel comfortable with. Otherwise, I guess the question would be, which way do you see this backfield looking like next year? Because really, Kenny Gainwell is the only guy. I know they brought in a guy this week from San Francisco, and there's some probably, young futures guys on this team, but Gainwell's the only guy they have with any experience currently on the roster.
Well, I think they would like to have DeAndre Swift back, and I think DeAndre Swift would be enticing for someone like a Kellen Moore, who is going to maximize his skill set. The pass-catching element was the most alluring trait when you acquire somebody like a DeAndre Swift, and the Eagles really didn't. He had his lowest reception and receiving total in his career, which is sort of puzzling. So you have to wonder if you're DeAndre, if you would even want to come back, although looking at the offensive coordinator and knowing that there could be a change in philosophy and usage, maybe you want to. But you look at the Miles Sanders deal last year, and that may be a lesson learned for a lot of teams looking for a prospective running back, which could ultimately help DeAndre Swift. But still, I think he's going to make a tick more than the Eagles are willing to pay. That being said, there's a lot of running backs early on day 3 in the draft that I think would fulfill a need for the Eagles. And you might be able to find someone like I mentioned Zach Moss, or maybe J.K. Dobbins, who has been injury riddled, but somebody who has a lot of ability, and they can sort of work and piecemeal it together, because I think Kenny Gainwell is still going to be a factor as well. So that's kind of how I envision it. You have to look at the team and their trends. And the Eagles aren't a team that traditionally prioritizes the running back position.
Yeah, another spot you wrote about over at InsideTheBirds.com is the tight end spot. You said they whiffed on the trade for Albert O, but that's definitely a spot that, do you look in free agency, or is the draft a spot where you start to find that guy behind Dallas Goedert? Because it seems like when Goddard went out this year, they really struggled.
Yeah, I think it's time to start, maybe on day 2 even, looking to develop a young tight end with a receiving prowess, an athletic tight end that can really help threaten the middle of the field and aid Jalen Hurts in sort of being a safety valve when Dallas Goedert's commanding a lot of attention. And they don't really have that. Jack Stoll is somebody who, whether folks like it or not, the Eagles really think highly of him. And I don't foresee him going anywhere. Now, he is a restricted free agent. I tend to think that they're going to find a way to – they're not going to tender him at that cost, but I think that they're going to be able to bring him back and come to an agreement on a one-year deal. But you need to upgrade from your number 2 tight end. Jack Stoll is a blocking-centric tight end, more of an inline guy, and does not really factor into the offensive equation. He only has 20 receptions for less than 200 yards in his career, which is 50 games, a span of 50 games. So they have to get better there athletically, and I think the draft is the way to do it.
The Quez Watkins experiment over, in your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, every sign points to Quez looking to play somewhere else. I think both for the Eagles and for Quez, you have to part ways. And for Quez, I mean, you can't even tweet his name. I couldn't even tweet that he was practicing without getting just this venom in the comment section. You know, Quez Watkins, he's this or that, he can't do that. Did he drop it? It's like, I'm just saying that he's practicing today. And when you see this, I mean, you if you're a player, you can't help but see this. You just kind of like with Nelson Aguilar, you almost need to go somewhere else and just, you know, change scenery and get in a new system and hope you can revitalize your career somewhere else. But I think from a health perspective, if you're Quez and you're the Eagles, just part ways. And if you're the Eagles, you have to find, I think, a bigger bodied receiver that can also threaten vertically, because Kellen Moore is going to use the number 3 wide receiver role quite a bit. And to me, a guy like a Noah Brown, who has a lot of familiarity with Kellen Moore, he's coming off a relatively good season, back-to-back seasons of having over 550 receiving yards, would be a really nice piece there to add. They need a lot more contributions, and Quez Watkins was too much of a highly volatile player, and that's not going to work.
Yeah, would you bring Zacchaeus back, or would you just say, look, it's time to really get a difference-making player at that third spot?
Yeah, I really like OZ, and you may remember last free agency, he was a name that I mentioned would make sense for the Eagles to bring in because he offered a different dimension, short area quickness, good in space, and I thought that he would have been good on those dump-offs and things of that nature, but they didn't quite use him at all, and I thought that he really shone well as a blocker, but that's not what he signed here to be primarily do, and he may want to go elsewhere, but I also think that kind of like we talked about with DeAndre Swift, if you're Zacchaeus, you may want to stay here if the Eagles want you back, because Kellen Moore can use you a lot different, accentuate what you do well, and I think OZ has a lot to bring to the table and could be a nice 4. And when you look beyond Devontae Smith and A.J. Brown, there's not a lot of experienced players behind him. So I think bringing back Zacchaeus helps stability, and at least you let him compete for a spot in training camp and see where he fits.
Are you on the Tanner McKee train, or do you think they, because they like to get a veteran backup generally? I'm interested to see how they play this because – where they are cap-wise, all the moves, can they spend the amount of money that they have spent on backup quarterback this time around?
Well, the Eagles are a team that prioritizes the backup quarterback position, and when you're a team like the Eagles, you're in a position in which they are where the Super Bowl window is still open, you want to have insurance behind Jalen Hurts and ensure that the season won't get derailed should your quarterback miss any time. And I think that you have to see where you're at with Tanner McKee and his development, but I think it behooves the Eagles to bring in a veteran quarterback. Maybe a Tyler Huntley is a name that I mentioned who offers a versatile skill set, has played in games, and I think he would kind of be able to fit in seamlessly here, would be a good option. Maybe someone perhaps like an Easton Stick who has experience with Kellen Moore, probably is not going to cost a whole lot to bring in here. And then competition brings out the best in everyone. Let those two guys compete. I mean, Tanner McKee being the other player, and see what you have. But I ultimately think that the Eagles are going to target a veteran quarterback in the free agency period.
All right, getting you ready for the free agency period. We'll do it here on Football at 4 on the Sports Bash live on 97.3 ESPN. And don't forget, check out the Inside the Birds podcast and InsideTheBirds.com. Andrew DiCecco, everybody, leading you up to, as he said, the Combine is almost here. Draft season is underway. Thanks, buddy.
Thanks, Mike.